This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Last night, we got to see the top of the table in action with the Kansas City Chiefs falling to the Philadelphia Eagles. Today, we're going to talk more about the bottom end and talk about the teams in the playoff hunt, but not necessarily in the playoffs as of yet. We're going to talk to Ryan Williams, get his read on what the playoff picture in both the AFC and the NFC looks like right now. Then I'll dive in and outline where I see value across Week 12 in the NFL. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as I am every Tuesday by Ryan Williams. Check him out on Twitter at Ryan_W. Ryan, pretty fun game last night. Not a super high scoring affair, but I thought it was still an enjoyable contest overall. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. It was a lackluster matchup to start. I mean, which we kind of talked about yesterday. Those defenses came out and really showed out, especially on the Chiefs side. I think that was the most impressive thing to me, for 3.5 quarters, is that Chiefs defense was just unbelievable against a very good offensive line and a very good schemed offensive team. It's the tale as old as time. Who can Mahomes trust outside of Kelsey? And even then, Kelsey with the fumble in the red zone, turnovers are not gonna get it done in this league. And when your receivers have 6 drops or whatever the case may be in the game yesterday and leading the league in drops, this is just going to be their Achilles heel all year. I was surprised to not see, the rookie Rashee Rice get as much work as we had thought in the past, tending to lean on Justin Watson and Valdez-Scantling, unbelievable, just a little bit there. But, it's still Mahomes, it's still Kelsey, and the way that the defense is playing, my goodness, I mean, they can definitely, keep the score close. And so, normally in those instances, you give Mahomes back under 2 minutes to just be able to, get down the field and maybe kick a field goal. I think they'll be all right. But yeah, shout out to the Eagles, sitting with that 1-loss record still. And, they look like pretty much it's their conference, I should say, to lose, especially, with 1 loss. They give themselves a nice buffer here going into Week 12.
Yeah, pretty tough matchup for them too in Week 12, taking on the Buffalo Bills. I'll talk about that game later on in the show for today, because it's a pretty fun matchup there between the Eagles and the Bills. But big players make big plays, and shockingly, Devontae Smith, a bigger player than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Who could have possibly predicted that? But shout out to the Eagles for their win last night. We're going to dive into the playoff picture and talk about some teams more on the fringes, talk about the Bills a bit, talk about the Chargers, the AFC race, and of course, the wide open NFC as well, all here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. We, of course, have our NFL Week number 12 full preview tomorrow with Dr. Ed Feng, but also we'll have college football in there too, because we've got to talk about the game between Michigan and Ohio State. So we'll have both on the show for tomorrow to get you ready for a big week in both college and the NFL. Also, Tom Vecchio will break down his favorite player props across the Thanksgiving 3-game slate. That'll be up here on the Covering the Spread podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus on Wednesday. So make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify. Let's talk now about the playoff races, Ryan, because I think they're pretty interesting on both sides, things starting to take shape. Let's talk about the AFC side of things, where markets are not back up as of yet to make or miss the playoffs. But prior to last night's game, the Bills were plus 164, the Chargers were plus 360, the Steelers were minus 110 to make it for this year. So when you're looking at the AFC side of things, any value for you that you saw, any teams you want to buy into as of right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about Buffalo all year, so I'm gonna stick with that. I mean, even Buffalo's futures, which we can get into later, I think have some merit to them. They really have had the Denver loss. You don't feel great about that, but losing to Cincinnati when Cincinnati was kind of firing all cylinders there a couple of weeks ago by 6, losing to New England by 4, losing to Jacksonville, a playoff team, by 5 at home was a tough one. And then the Jets to start off the season just in a weird game. Like, they just have been in kind of these weird matchups. But, the thing that I look at, Jim, is in their wins, like how dominant they are. And I don't care who the competition is. Like, when you're winning by 25 plus points, in more than 60% of your wins in a season, like you got something going on there. And so I think they just really need to dig deep, figure it out. You love that, Khalil Shakir is getting into the mix there. This guy looks like he can perform for him. No idea where Gabe Davis has been. He's on a milk carton. I expect Stephon Diggs to be able to get going. And you love James Cook. Like, they moved on from Devin Singletary for this kid, and he seems to be, one of the best backs that they've had in the Josh Allen era to be able to rely on. And I think the defense, if they can stay healthy, they can get there. They have a great matchup against Philly. I can't wait to hear your breakdown before they go into the bye. After that bye, they are on the road in Arrowhead, and then they have to face Dallas at home. So, they really kind of control their destiny. But, these are the type of things, like we talk about, right, are the schedule and, looking ahead. And if you're telling me that, right now we can get the Bills at plus money to make the playoffs, and they can, go against some playoff caliber teams and have a chance to win those games, and then the market changes on its head, like, I want to be in on that. This was a preseason, one of the preseason favorites in the AFC to be, in the dance late. And I still want to take advantage of the marketplace there. So the Bills are definitely one that I'm looking at. Obviously, very reeling of with Cincinnati losing Joe Burrow. So I think we have to be off of them. I mean, the AFC is absolutely not great to talk about, which lends to, there's some merit to be. Okay, so the wild card picture shapes up right now with Cleveland, Houston, and Pittsburgh being in there. I think Buffalo can and will knock Pittsburgh out of that race to get one of those spots. And I still don't know what to think about Cleveland. I mean, the defense is good enough to keep them in games. I love DTR, loved him at UCLA.
Yeah.
College product. He's just so fun to root for. But, can one of these other teams outside on the outside looking in knock them out? It's very tough to trust Indianapolis. Like, what about Denver, Jim? Like, they're 5-5 right now, sitting with a 500 record. And, I kind of had some futures on Denver to begin the season that they're still not looking great. But, now we get back into that mix. This is a 500 team. Granted, they play in a tough division, but when you're looking at their schedule here, and look their wins, beating Kansas City, beating Buffalo, beating Minnesota, all 3 of those a playoff team. Like, they beat Green Bay. That team is kind of, on the up and up in the NFC. And so they got a matchup against Cleveland, right? Helping your playoff race. Now you're sitting at 6-5. You're at Houston. That's going to be a tough one. You're at the Chargers. Like, is Brandon Staley even going to be the coach for the Chargers? That makes me hard to trust them. So I think they have a favorable matchup. They will have a matchup in Detroit as well, too. But again, they brought in Sean Payton. They kind of started off tough to start the season, and it would be like, oh, well, yeah, Denver made it in because of the way their defense is playing, and, Russell was able to make it work. So I think I don't know what the odds are on Denver, but I think I might be taking some shots on them just with how the state of the AFC is.
Yeah, they're a team definitely worth checking in on once odds are reposted for the AFC, because it's just I think that what you're referring to is there's a lot of vulnerability at the bottom of the table in the AFC because of the Steelers not having the world's most efficient offense, because of the Browns not having Deshaun Watson, because of the Bengals not having Joe Burrow. There's a lot of room for teams to make a run, which is why Buffalo might be able to make it even without being perfect in this brutal schedule they have. And
right.
I think the way I'd handle Buffalo is, do you think they are a value to win in week 12? If you think they're a value to win in week 12, then that's where you consider their playoff number as well. I think that you kind of need to ask that if-then question with them. I do think they're a good value to potentially maybe not win this week, but I think they can cover, which means that they could potentially make a run at the win as well. So I think that's the way I'd handle them. But I agree that Denver, at least worth checking out once odds are reposted later on this morning. On the NFC side, honestly, Ryan, a lot of teams have at least an outside shot, especially now the Vikings had that loss against Denver. There's some stuff up for grabs there. So What are you looking at there? Which teams are you buying as potentially making a run here over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, this becomes interesting because I really did like Minnesota's chances, a lot earlier on. I was thinking about
Yeah.
them even to potentially get the North, but it looks like Detroit's got a pretty good hold and kibosh on that. Outside looking in, Green Bay still got a shot. They're going to have a tough matchup. If they can go in and beat Detroit on Thanksgiving, that puts them at 5-6. That definitely gets them in the race. The problem is that they'll then have to face the Chiefs 1 week later. It isn't at Lambeau. So we'll see what Jordan Love has, up his sleeve. I think, the teams in the wild card picture right now are just so good. You're looking at Dallas, you're looking at Seattle, Minnesota, even with Dobbs, it feels great. The one team, and we can talk about this later, who I think has a shot of making the playoffs, who's not currently in, are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They play in the NFC South, which is an absolute, joke of a division. Like, I'm not trusting the Saints, and the Saints are sitting at 5-5 right now, and they're kind of buried in the mix because they're winning that division. But Tampa Bay, they've lost like respectable games, Jim. They lost to the 49ers, like lost to Houston, lost to Buffalo. Atlanta was a close game for them in that division, like lost to Detroit in this, whatever they are on right now, 1-5 streak. But then, you're looking at Indy, you're looking at Carolina, you're looking at Atlanta. Like, they do have to play at Lambeau. And then Jacksonville is the only playoff team. Jacksonville and New Orleans are the only two playoff teams that they have to play. They get Carolina twice, on the second half of this run here. And so I think that, plus 410 to win the NFC South, got some merit to that in my future bets. Let's just say it. Let's just call it what it is. And, when I look at it, it's they have a pretty well-coached defense. Baker's Baker, but, they have explosive weapons on offense. We have seen them be able to put up points. And this division is one where, you can't tell me that, the Saints are 4 odds better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point in time to get there. Yes, they do have talent. We don't even know what the quarterback situation is. They can't trust Carr. It's switching them in and out. The defense is not the defense that we once knew. And so that's the one that really has my eye on as we look at futures.
Yeah, if I look at my 2023 only numbers, so ignoring priors, which priors are still in there for the actual model, but just looking at them hypothetically for just this year, New Orleans is currently 14th in my power rankings, which is the highest ranked NFC South team. But 15th is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one spot behind them. And as you mentioned, New Orleans is minus 130 to win the NFC South, whereas Tampa Bay is plus 410. Atlanta is 24th, and Carolina is dead freaking last. So I do think it's kind of those two teams that are the most legitimate teams in this division, whether it's Heineke or Ritter. I don't really care too much about with the Falcons. I think they're just kind of that pass defense is pretty flawed. They've been inefficient on early downs, whether it be passing or rushing. So I don't really view them as being a super legitimate threat to win this division. And I think the Saints beat them this week. I've got that coming up later on as well. So I agree that Bucs are at least worth digging into because they've been efficient passing via Baker Mayfield. That defense is flawed for sure, and they've got a lot of injuries in their secondary right now, but they can do some stuff. So I don't hate that at all. I think that's a very interesting shout out for you, Ryan, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at plus 410 to potentially make a run at the NFC South. Let's take a look at the MVP market because after last night's game, Jalen Hurts is now the favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. He is plus 250. Lamar Jackson plus 420. Patrick Mahomes plus 460. Tua Tagovailoa is 5-1. Any value for you, Ryan? Anybody you're looking to buy into at this juncture?
Yeah, Dak Prescott would have been interesting to me had the Eagles lost, because I think that would have still put them in the mix to, potentially win the East, which would have been really interesting there. Still thinking about Brock Purdy. at 15-1. Like, I'm looking at the teams who are going to be, at the top of their conference when it's all said and done. And like the 49ers, like you can't look anywhere, in the marketplace without seeing them, in the 2 or 3 slot, as it relates to NFC futures. So, in that regard, like Brock Purdy's been having some great games. Like, this offense is explosive. We know it's a quarterback award. So people will look at Christian McCaffrey, like, don't even bother doing that. But Brock Purdy, I think, has some merit there. I also think, there is some merit to Pat Mahomes still at 460. Like, he's gonna have to choose to do it all. Kelsey's kind of been having a struggling year, but if the Chiefs are sitting at that number 1 seed in the AFC, and for some reason like Jalen Hurts is reeling as of late, or the problem with Jalen, he does so much. Like, even at last night's game, like the passing wasn't there, but look at the rushing upside that this guy offers you. But I still think there is merit to taking Mahomes there, and I think they have it right now. Like, there's no need to get cute in this market at this current juncture, like all the other quarterbacks who we would look to take. I just don't think that they set up favorably at this point in time. But I do think that there is still some value when we can look at 15-1 for some of these guys.
Yeah, Purdy is interesting. I don't know, like, would he deserve it? I don't know. But like, he's really good. And like, that offense is playing very well right now. They've only had 4 games this year with all their big 4 being fully healthy. And Purdy has been phenomenal in those games. And again, it could very much be the system, but like, he's operating the system at a hyper efficient clip, and it's one of the best it's the best offense in football by a wide margin in my model. So I, would I vote for him over Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts? No, but like, I'm not a voter, so who cares what I think? And I think that there's at least a path for Purdy to make some noise there. So I agree with you that like, it may sound weird to think that Purdy's in play for that kind of market, but I don't disagree with you. I think that he's at least interesting at 15-1. Not betting it myself, but I think that he is at least interesting at that number. Any other futures catching your eye before we get to week number 12, Ryan?
Yeah, I was on that Tampa one, but I kind of, I jumped the gun on that one, but I really did love that. I am looking at the offensive player of the year market. This has been one that's been littered with wide receivers, over the past couple of years since 2019. I thought I would have to sneeze. It's a false alarm. Nope.
Is it one of those where you caught it and now it's going to be stuck in your brain, your like nose for the rest of eternity?
Yeah, it's definitely stuck in there. So I'll be mid-sentence and it'll come through. But the one who interests me in this market here, if we're looking at wide receivers, is CeeDee Lamb. Like, he's been so freaking good for this team, and just so good for Dak to be able to lean on. So when we're looking at 14-1 there, it looks good. AJ Brown had the streak of 125-yard games, didn't come to fruition last night. Christian McCaffrey, even then, definitely some merit there. Like Tyreek Hill, he leaves the game on Sunday, is able to come back. He's just been a freaking monster, on pace to break the wide receiver receiving record. So that it probably is his to lose. But if we can get CeeDee Lamb in the mix here, and thinking about the touchdown market, right? I think that's the CeeDee Lamb gets going here in the next couple weeks. I think 14-1 could be good for him.
And CeeDee Lamb about to play in one of the biggest, most watched games of the entire year, as he is every year on Thanksgiving. Right. A lot of eyes on that. And back at home, facing a pretty leaky Washington defense, that's a spotlight game for a guy like him to potentially make some noise for an award like this. So if you want to bet CeeDee Lamb, if you think that there's value in 14-1, that's one you'd probably want to bet before Thanksgiving, because of it being a major inflection point for teams like the Cowboys in the award markets. That's all we got for Ryan for today. Ryan, I want to thank you as always for swinging by, breaking down your thoughts on the futures market. Enjoy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. We'll talk to you once again next week.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you as well, Jim, and to everybody out there who's listening. Thankful to all the covering the spread fans that we have. So it should be a fun week. Can't wait to chop it up with you next week, and stay safe and have a happy holiday.
All those fans thankful for you as well, Ryan. That is Ryan Williams. Check him out on Twitter at RyanAlexander_W. We'll have him back with us next week on Monday to break down Bears and Vikings, which should be a pretty fun game to talk about later on. We're going to dive into what my numbers say about week number 12 here in just 1 second. But first, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only, $5 pregame moneyline wager required, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700 visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's take a look now at what my numbers are saying about week number 12 in the NFL and break down my favorite bets at FanDuel Sportsbook for this week. The one bet I've got on Thanksgiving Day is going to be the 49ers at the Seahawks. And right now, I like the over in this game. 42.5 is currently -118. So you're paying a pretty hefty price, but I do think there is value in that number. Sounds like Geno Smith should be good to go for this game, which is a big boost for the Seahawks offense. And like I mentioned before, Ryan, this 49ers offense, when they've had the big four of Ayuk, Kittle, Debo, and McCaffrey, has been unstoppable. Brock Purdy in those games is at 0.39 passing net expected points per dropback. Net expected points is numberFire's EPA metric, where the league averages around 0.1 or so. Purdy's at 0.39, which is like world beater-esque. It typically would lead the league with that number. And they've got all four of those guys healthy for this week. As a result of that, the 49ers can put up points in bunches, as they did against the Bucs on Sunday. They put up 27 themselves. Couldn't quite get enough from the Bucs side to get the over for that one, but we don't need a ton from the Seahawks in order to get to an over at 42.5. 49ers tend to be a team that faces a lot of passing volume on early downs, where teams don't want to run the ball against them that much. And the Seahawks have been really good through the air on early downs. They're not the most pass-heavy team, but when they do decide to throw on early downs, they've been very efficient. It's been the rushing efficiency and late downs where they've had some issues. Now, they've got a tough ground matchup here, and there's no Kenneth Walker III, so we could potentially see the Seahawks skew a bit more toward the pass here. And a passing attack, heavy game, lends itself more to overs than to unders. Talanoa Huafunga may not play, or is not going to play in this game with a torn ACL. With him not being out there, the safety for the 49ers, that's probably going to be a boost for the Seahawks passing efficiency as well. So when I look at my model for this game, factoring in how good the 49ers are right now, factoring in the fact that Seahawks are pretty good through the air when they are forced to throw, I've got the total here pretty well clear of this number at 42.5. So it is noteworthy that it's -118. That is definitely a hefty price to pay, but I think it is worth it with the way things stack up right now. So I'll take the Seahawks and the 49ers over 42.5 at -118. If you want some more thoughts on the Thanksgiving games, again, Primetime Tom with Tom Vecchio back with you later on this week tomorrow to break down his favorite player props across the Thanksgiving games. Let's talk now about the other games where I'm showing value for this week, beginning with a big divisional matchup between the Jags and the Texans. And this one could basically decide who wins the AFC South. And I like the Texans money line once again at -102, the 11th consecutive game my model has shown value in the Texans money line. It's wild, and I adore it. The Texans have made that look pretty good so far. They're 6-4 this year, so they've won more games than they've lost. And as far as the model goes, they've actually come through in the money line 4 times when they were at plus money. They're -102 against the Jags. You can potentially find a better number elsewhere. So as always, do shop around. But I think even the -102 does sell this Houston offense a bit short. I've bumped up the Jags in my model to account for the fact that they struggled quite a bit without Zay Jones, but Zay Jones came back last week, and finally they showed some life against the Titans. And now they're facing the Texans, who do not have the world's best pass defense. So they should be pretty efficient once again. But even with that, I've got the Texans favored by 1.9 at home, which does imply there is value in them at -102 on the money line. CJ Stroud threw 3 picks against Arizona. That's obviously a bummer, and a lot of those were high leverage. But even with that, they still covered in that game at -4.5 at open. They won by 5, so they still covered despite the fact they had some bad turnover luck in that game. Texans still rank 4th in numberFire schedule-adjusted passing efficiency. They're 10th in overall offense, and the ground game has been more efficient of late with Devin Singletary out there instead of Dameon Pierce, and I don't care a ton about that, but it does mean it's less of a detriment when they decide to run the ball in early downs as opposed to passing. So I think that's a positive for a team that can skew a bit more run heavy than you would like. I respect the Jags a lot. I think that they're better than they played so far this year. I think they're a good offense and a team that I want to bet on at some point this year, but I don't think this is the week. I agree with the model here that the Texans are still undervalued. So -102 on the Texans money line. Very okay with taking that personally and riding with the Texans once again. We'll see if they can get to 7-4 and take control of the AFC South in this game. Other money line I like for this week is going to be in another big divisional matchup, trying to settle the NFC South. I like the Saints. They are -102 on the money line at FanDuel Sportsbook, and I think that's a good value as they take on the Falcons. Reports on Monday were that Derek Carr had yet to clear concussion protocol. Now, I'm not sure how this works in bye weeks, but typically you have to practice in order to clear protocol. So I don't think it's a surprise that the Carr has not cleared it yet. So still plenty of time for him to get cleared. I would downgrade the passing efficiency for this offense if they were to not have Carr, but I think he should be able to get clear by Sunday. The team is likely though to be without both Michael Thomas and Marshawn Lattimore, but even when you account for those injuries, my model is the Saints favored by 1.7 in this game. They're the 14th ranked team by my model when you ignore a prior versus the Falcons, who are in 24th, as we discussed with Ryan. And the prior also does favor the Saints. So they get even a bit better once you factor in the prior, which I do still do entering week number 12. The Saints defense has also benefited from an easy schedule. So you did to knock them down, but even when you account for their schedule, they have the 2nd ranked late down success rate allowed on defense, trailing just the Cleveland Browns. That defense has had its flaws for sure, and they face an easy schedule, but they have been pretty good even when you make those adjustments, especially on late downs, which is important because the Falcons are probably going to be playing in a lot of late downs. Their early down efficiency, both on the ground and via the air, has been pretty poor this year, especially once you ding them for the easy schedule they faced. I think we could see this number move against me if we get bad news on Derek Carr, but I'm willing to risk that personally, given there is a pretty big gap between what my model has and what the market has. So I will take the Saints -102 in Atlanta, taking on the Falcons for this week in that big NFC South showdown. Final bet I like for this week is one we alluded to when talking to Ryan. That is the Bills at the Eagles. Right now, the Bills +3.5 is -115 at FanDuel Sportsbook, and I do show value in that number right now. Now, for me, when I'm looking at Eagles games, I want to focus more on my newer model than my older model. Now, typically, my older model has performed better because I think it has a pretty good concept behind it. It weights up passing efficiency, and it's performed better than my newer model as a result, which is why typically I lean more on the older model. The newer model, though, I think is better with the Eagles because it doesn't weigh up passing efficiency as much. And the Eagles are not going to grade out as well when you factor in passing efficiency more because they're not the world's most efficient passing offense as we saw with all the sacks last night. They made plays when they had to, but they're not a super efficient passing offense. So I want to lean more on the model that I think grades the Eagles more fairly and takes a more holistic approach. And that one actually has the Eagles favored by 1.9 in this game. So still favored, but not by as much as you would think when the spread is 3.5. That model has these two teams nearly identical on a neutral field. Bills 4th in its power rankings. Eagles are 5th. So slight lean toward the Bills there. The Eagles, I think, should be able to move the football here against this Bills rush defense, which is not great, but I would say that it's also a unit that has been better than you would think if we look since the Matt Milano injury. I thought they'd be really bad, but they've actually been pretty okay in that time. As for the Bills offense, they rank 2nd in the league in adjusted late down success rates and 3rd in adjusted early down EPA based on my numbers. Their adjusted early down passing numbers in week 11, I should say, the first game with no Ken Dorsey, were actually the best they've been since week 4 against the Dolphins. That does not justify firing Ken Dorsey by any means, but it does mean that they played well in that game. They responded well to the change at OC. The Eagles find ways to get the job done, which is why I'm going with the spread here versus the money line. It's not a bet that makes me comfortable. I do not like betting against Philadelphia because typically it doesn't go well, but I do still think the Bills are a team worth buying into, given how efficient they've been, given they did play pretty well in their first game without Ken Dorsey. I think they're a team we can feel good about still. So I do like the Bills plus 3.5 at -115 at FanDuel Sportsbook. So the 4 bets I like for week number 12, Bills plus 3.5 -115. I like the Saints at -102 against the Falcons, the Texans -102 against the Jaguars, and then over in the Seahawks 49ers 42.5, which is -118 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Before we close up shop for today, do got to go back through recommendations. Last week here on the show, an overall pretty good week for the show, if you take into consideration all recommendations. Let's begin things off with Dr. Ed Feng. You can find him on Twitter at The Power Rank. Check out his work at thepowerrank.com. Ed is with us in the college football and NFL shows. College side of things, only one bet recommendation from Ed. That was J.J. McCarthy to go under 230.5 passing yards for Michigan in their game. What they were taking on, I believe that was Maryland. And McCarthy did go easily under this number. That was -114. McCarthy finished just 141 passing yards in that game. They did get the win, so kudos to Michigan for that, but pretty easy under for Ed on McCarthy. On the NFL side of things, Ed liked Lamar Jackson on Thursday night under to not throw a pick, basically. That was -114, and that was a winner. Lamar, 2 touchdowns, no picks in that game, so win from Ed there. And then he had the Chiefs -2.5 against the Eagles. Of course, the Eagles did get the job done last night. So 2-1 week for Ed. Good calls by him. We'll have him back on the show tomorrow to talk about both college football and the NFL. JJ Zacharyson was our guest here on the show. You can find JJ on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Find his work at LateRound.com. Another profitable week for JJ once again, thanks in large part to DJ Moore. JJ had DJ Moore plus 180 for an anytime touchdown. Moore had a long touchdown from Justin Fields in that game as the Bears made a push to win that one. Couldn't quite get the job done, but didn't matter for JJ. He did hit the DJ Moore plus 180, so that was a win there. Other win was Breece Hall, over 27.5 receiving yards at -114. Hall had about 50. A couple long plays for him, including a touchdown, so a win there for JJ. 2 losses were Trey McBride, over 55.5 receiving yards, -114. He had 43 yards. And then Chris Godwin at 3-1 for an anytime touchdown. He didn't get the job done there either, but good week for JJ. Profitable week once again. Touchdown bets for JJ have been insane so far this year. So please make sure to follow JJ on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Not on the show this week because of Thanksgiving, but happy to get JJ back on with us next week to get some more winners out in the ether. We had Ryan Williams on last night to talk about Monday Night Football between the Chiefs and the Eagles. Find Ryan on Twitter at Ryan Alexander _W. Tough one here because wasn't quite as much offense as we thought there'd be going into that game. Recommendations for Ryan were Chiefs -2.5. Of course, Eagles won that game outright. You like Kelsey in the alternate market for 100 plus receiving yards at plus 198. And Kelsey had a weird night, had that fumble, had a drop in a pretty key situation. So finished with around, I think, 41 receiving yards. So not quite to the 100 plus receiving yards here at plus 198. Did get a win on Devontae Smith. Ryan had him over 16.5 receiving yards, and Smith went well over that number via a long reception near touchdown. Would have liked the touchdown because Ryan did have Devontae Smith plus 230 for an anytime touchdown. Couldn't quite get that one, but did get the over on the 16.5 receiving yards. Ryan liked A.J. Brown over 6.5 receptions, minus 102. Brown locked down by the Chiefs defense, so kudos to them there. Couldn't quite get that one. Had Kenneth Gainwell 6-1 for an anytime touchdown. DeAndre Swift got the one non-Hurts rushing touchdown for the Eagles in this game, so couldn't kick Gainwell there. Final one was Mahomes, 3+ passing touchdowns at 2-1. Mahomes did get 2, so came somewhat close and would have had it if not for the Marquez Valdez-Scantling drop. That also would have gotten Ryan likely the cover in that game, so pretty tough drop there as it did swing a couple things against Ryan, but we'll get Ryan back with us next week. Talk Bears and Vikings. It should be a fun one up in Minneapolis. Finally, we had my stuff from last week in one of the better weeks I've had so far this year. 3-1 on the NFL side of things. I had the Texans minus 4.5 against the Cardinals. That closed at 5.5, but so was not a win at the closing number, but was a win. We discussed it on Tuesday. So Texans minus 4.5 was a winner. Also, the Bills minus 6.5 against the Jets. That moved to 7 and closed there. And then the Bills did win pretty comfortably by 26 points in that game. One loss to me was the Bucks and 49ers over 41.5. It's kind of how it goes when you're betting a spread or betting an over on a game that has a large spread where you can see things late in games where the teams forego field goals to go for touchdowns. That's what happened here. Almost got a touchdown with the Bucks late in that game. Couldn't quite get there. So loss on that one. It's how it goes for sure. And then other total was the Rams Seahawks under 46 in that game. I think had 33 total points. Easy win there. So 3-1 week in the NFL side of things. Bigger profits, though, came for F1. Talked about Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Grand Prix on the show on Wednesday. 4 recommendations. One of those was a Max Verstappen win at minus 250. I mean, you expect that to win. So can't really pat myself on the back there, but Max Verstappen did win that race. But the big one, though, was Lance Stroll, 16-1 to finish top 6. Now, Stroll had a big issue in qualifying and started this race back in 19th, but he started to start the race on soft tires, and there were a couple spins in the first lap, and Stroll made up like 9 spots on the first lap. Decided to pit, get out of sequence, and that wound up being the right strategy with the way that the safety cars broke, and Stroll wound up finishing 5th. So a win there at 16-1 for Lance Stroll. Been pretty high in Aston Martin recently, and I would not be shocked if I'm high on them once again this week as they finish out the year. Other 2 recommendations were Daniel Ricciardo plus 220 for a top 10 and Pierre Gasly plus 160 for a top 10. Gasly qualified 4th or started 4th after a grid penalty for Carlos Sainz, but he didn't pit under a safety car. The second safety car probably should have because his tires fell off pretty bad and he finished 11th, but got close there. Kind of wish he had taken a different approach. His teammate finished 4th, Esteban Ocon. So I feel like I probably should have gotten that one, but didn't quite get there. And Ricardo did not finish top 10 either, a plus 220. But the Stroll 16-1 one felt very good for a top 6. So overall, very good week. Felt good about things and happy with how the results broke for me this past week. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Big thank you once again to Ryan Williams swinging by, breaking down his thoughts on NFL futures market. Find Ryan on Twitter at RyanAlexander_W. Tomorrow, a couple shows. We're going to have Dr. Ed Fengon talk NFL week number 12 and college football week 13. We'll talk about Michigan versus Ohio State and other key games for this week. We'll also have Primetime Tom Vecchio breaking down his favorite props across Thanksgiving in the Covering the Spread podcast feed. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find all those shows on FanDuel TV Plus. If you got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can also find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis. You can follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to your bets. Good luck to your bets across Tuesday. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to get you ready for what should be a fun week of football. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.